And now we're going to transition and keep the train rolling with Hazzan Sara Geffen Geller. And we are really blessed to have the opportunity to learn from her. And it says here, Hazzan Geller has 28 years experience as a cantor in conservative synagogues, as a teacher, as a singer, and I am looking forward to having the opportunity to learn with you. Welcome, Hazzan Sara Geffen Geller.
And Chag Sameach, I'm thrilled to be a part of this. The previous session was a great lead-in for what I wanted to talk about. Your actions matter. And maybe that's one reason why Boaz is my favorite guy in the Tanakh. I titled my session, Let Boys Be Boaz, because Boaz is someone that I can point to any younger person and say, do what he did. Be the kind of person that Boaz is in the story. Do the right thing, especially when no one is looking. We can all use examples of that. And you can see examples all the time of people who don't do that. So I wanted to spend some time giving you, I have 9.5 reasons why Boaz is the greatest guy in the Tanakh. When did the story take place? It was always confusing to me growing up because the book of Ruth is back there near the story of Esther. I think it's placed towards the rear of the Tanakh because we think it was written in that era, maybe somewhere around the 500s BCE. But the story of the book of Ruth takes place during the time of Judges. And that's obviously before King David. So it's a historical novel written about a period of time, maybe 500 years before the author. That's what we think. And I like to say that the main action of the book of Ruth really takes place before the story opens. All right. It was in the time of Judges when people didn't follow the word of God too closely, where every person did what was right in their own eyes. And there was famine, there was chaos. And so Elimelech and Naomi opted out and took their sons to Moab. There they grew up and married Moabite women, and then things didn't go so well for them. Elimelech died, and their two sons, Machlon and Chilion, also known as Weakly and Sickly, they also died. And then we know that Ruth insisted on coming back with Naomi. And then she gets to meet Boaz. Now, I want to spend a minute on how they're related because we think they are. Ruth is from the people of Moab. And who are they? They're descended from Lot and Lot's daughter. And Lot was a nephew of Abraham and grandson of Terah. So just keep that in your head. Terah was her ancestor, and Moab, and we don't know all the names of the generations, but then there was King Eglon of Moab, and the legend has it that Ruth is the daughter of Moab. Now think about Boaz, who we meet in chapter 2. What's Boaz's family roots? Well, he's descended from Judah, going back to Jacob, Isaac, Abraham, and who was the father of Abraham? Terah. So it's possible that Ruth and Boaz are like ninth cousins. So there's an overall theme in the story that the two branches of the family are coming back together to continue to show you the way to King David and the Messiah, who legendarily is descended from King David. Okay, so Ruth and Boaz become the great-grandparents of King David. That's their merit. That's their zechut. So what are the 9.5 great things about Boaz? Well, his very first entrance into the story, he comes to the field to his workers and says, God be with you. like a good employer. I actually took that as an example to follow. And there have been some years where when I went into work for a day at the synagogue, not on Shabbat when I was solely there for services, but if it was a weekday and I'm going in to work for the day, I would go to each of the different offices and say hello to the people who are there. Because otherwise, if I just went to my own office, it was very isolating. So I've always carried that in my head as that's a good way to be. You go into work, go say hello to everybody else. Number 2, the fact that he said, God be with you to his employees. The Midrash says this is one reason that people started saying this, like Boaz started the custom of greeting people in the name of God. It was a custom started by we, the people, but it became like a law given from God. So it's a very important example in the Tanakh for us to follow. Number 3, one Midrash says, well, he didn't actually say, may God be with you in the fields. He actually said to his employees, is God with you in the fields? Which means, are you still following God's rules out in the fields here? Are you allowing the extra sheaves to drop so that a poor person can pick them up? So the rabbis point to Boaz as someone who followed God's law and wanted to make sure that his employees were following God's law while they're working in his fields. All right, number 4. Number 4 is when Boaz sees Ruth for the first time, he greets her. He wants to find out more about her. He sees a newcomer. He's inclusive. And what I think is so beautiful about this is it's a real contrast to how Naomi treats her daughter-in-law. If you recall, Naomi and Ruth walk for a few days across hilly terrain to get from Moab back to Beit Lechem. And when they come in, Naomi stands there and says, I went out full and I came back empty. And I always thought to myself, how awkward, like Ruth is standing right next to her. Ruth must be saying, what am I, chopped liver? You can't even introduce me to your friends and your, community here that we schlepped all the way back to. On the other hand, Boaz sees her and greets her. So that's exemplary. Should we get so fortunate that we get back to congregating in our synagogues in large groups, this is something I think we can really keep in mind. I feel like people go to synagogues, I'm going to pray, I'm going to hang out with my friends, I'm going because it's a place I feel safe and it's a place I like to go. I think a lot of our members don't really wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to go to shul so that I can meet new people and ask them where they come from. And so all the regulars come to shul and we just sit back and do our regular thing. And then if a new person comes, we don't bother to talk to them. It's not because we're mean, it's just because it didn't occur to us. And so then the new person comes and is able to say, well, nobody talked to me and they don't like me. So let's be like Boaz and see a new person. It's going to be more important than ever that if somebody ventures into our congregation, that we present a friendly face, that we see them and talk to them. So that was number 4 that I liked about Boaz. Number 5 that I like about Boaz, he includes her. He says, come and have your lunch with us. Again, that's something that we could do. Number 6, the rabbis of the Midrash see Boaz as a scholar of Torah. One of the complications of this story is, well, the Torah says, you shall not marry the Moabite. And who is Ruth? She's a Moabite person. Well, the rabbis attribute to Boaz this scholarly dedication to looking through the law and considering this, and then he looks at Ruth, and here is where our very gender-based grammar Hebrew really helps us out. Boaz says, it says Moabite. It doesn't say Moabitess. So the feminine form is different than the masculine form. So it gives you a loophole. And I think that's really sweet. And that is why the rabbis attribute to Boaz the idea that you can marry a woman who's a descendant of Moab. You can't marry a man, but you can marry a woman. All right, number 7, if you recall in the story, at night, Boaz is sleeping on the threshing floor where his harvest is being processed. So the Midrash rabbis say, isn't he industrious? What a good worker he is. I mean, he's the business owner, but during high season, he's right there on site. He's not, away at his club or at home in his swimming pool. He is working day and night on his crop. But very realistically, the rabbis also say, well, this is the time of the judges. There's a lot of chaos and lawlessness. So it's probable that Boaz slept the night at his threshing floor so that nobody would come in and steal his grain. But in either case, he's there protecting his work. And number 8, here's the big one. He does the right thing when no one is looking. Ruth comes to him at night. She lies down, and in the middle of the night, he wakes up with the start, and oh my God, there's this woman here. Now, Naomi figured, I'll send Ruth to Boaz, and like any man, he won't be able to resist, and he's going to, he's going to seduce her, and then we can claim that he has to marry her. And Boaz, his wheels are turning, and he says, I could do that, but I'm not going to. And he says to Ruth, I understand what you want. I will do the right thing. I'm going to do it in the light of day. I'm going to follow due process. And when you think about it, in the Torah, it does say you shouldn't judge people too leniently because they're poor or too harshly because they're rich. You should judge based on the law. And this is what Boaz does. He's going to go through the process. I read through a lot of the Midrash Ruth Rabbah in English, and that's where I got a lot of these ideas. There are 3 individuals who strengthen themselves against the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, with an oath. They are Joseph, David, I guess on one occasion, and Boaz. So he's one of the top 3 guys. And I would rather a young person turn out more like Boaz, frankly, than King David. Okay. So he is going by the rules. He's not going by protexia. Oh, the fix is in. I'll fix this up for you. He's not saying, oh, you're so beautiful, Ruth. I'm going to marry you. He says, I understand the laws, and this is how we're going to do it. I always thought that Boaz is kind of a pun for Bo and Oz. In him there is strength. And the Midrash does find a verse to corroborate my thought, and that is Proverbs 24:5. Gever chacham ba'oz. A smart man has within them strength. The ish da'at, and a person of knowledge, me'ametz koach, fortifies themselves with strength. Number 9 reason why Boaz is so great. Towards the end of the story, there's a comment that might not make sense on the face of it. He recognizes, Boaz says to Ruth, I see that you show kindness more at the end than even at the beginning. And the Midrash treats this as a metaphor, saying, Ruth, you show kindness to people at the end of their life. You show kindness to older people, not only to younger people. And of course, that's a value in the Torah too, how you need to respect older people. Okay, so I said 9.5, right? I came up with 9 things that I think make him great. Well, he's not perfect. Nobody is. So one Midrash says, you know, if you're going to go down in the Tanakh for a mitzvah, you should go big. Like, do you want to be remembered as the guy who at lunch gave Ruth a pinch of grain? Or do you want to be remembered as the guy who gave Ruth, you know, a sack full of grain? So perhaps the only complaint one could make is that at that first lunch, Boaz could have been a lot more generous. But I don't care about that. I like the other 9 reasons that we came up with. I think Boaz is really a great exemplar of what the previous session taught. You know, your actions matter in this life. Getting back to the actions of the book of Ruth, I always thought that there's not much conflict in the book itself. You know, everybody acts the right way, especially Boaz. He does the right thing. The conflict in the book of Ruth takes place in that very first sentence, you know. Vayehi b'mei shvot hashoftim, vayehi ra'ah ba'aretz, vayelech ish mibeit lechem Yehuda lagur b'snei Moav, hu v'ishto shnei vanav. It was that time of lawlessness, in the time of the judges, when people did what was right in their own eyes, when they let themselves go astray, they didn't hew to the line of what God was telling us to do, to treat people like you would like to be treated. They did whatever they felt like it. Society fell apart. There was famine. And so Elimelech and Naomi, who are seen as leaders in the community, they opted out. They went someplace else and left the land of Israel. So Boaz is resolving the conflict. Ruth and Boaz, their actions point to a new and a different way of being, of acting in the right way, and of coming back to the land of Israel and recreating and renewing the community of the people of Israel. So it's a metaphor for the people of Israel in general, that by doing the right thing, that's where you're going to start to make things right in the world. In the Midrash, Rabbi Zeira says, this book was written to teach you the greatness of the reward for acts of loving kindness. So in the genealogy of the book, Ruth and Boaz, their actions are so great that their reward is they are the great-grandparents of King David. And King David is supposed to be the ancestor of the Mashiach, the Messiah. So acting the right way, that's a great zechut. Okay. But it's acts of loving kindness in a larger understanding. How do we bring about the Messiah? Okay, well, you know, the Messiah is going to be descended from these nice people. But we don't necessarily believe today in a person going to be the Messiah. What do we believe in? We believe that individual acts of chesed, an individual following of the mitzvot, that's what's going to bring the Messiah. If we each treat each other the right way, if we welcome the stranger and the newcomer, if we're polite to everybody, whether they're old or young, important or unimportant, if we greet the people who work for us, if we're mindful of following Jewish law, that's how we're going to start to bring about days of messianic peace. So I really love Boaz and what he stands for as an individual. And the book teaches us a lot and gives us a lot of things to look forward to. How could we be? How could our individual actions help bring messianic peace for everybody? So we start small, greeting people, being nice to people, sharing, going by the rules, whether the person is someone we really like or someone we don't like. Go by the rules.
That was extraordinary. I had never really thought about Boa. I've learned a lot about Ruth as a character, and we think about Ruth as being the the reason why we read this book on Shavuot, because of her acceptance of Torah. But I had not really thought about Boaz as much. And I also want to tell you the part of what you said that really there were a lot of moments that really stuck with me. But when you spoke about the connection to the Moabites and Terach, I had not really thought about that kind of closing of a loop, and kind of I think about Lot and Moab. I think about Moabites as enemies, and I actually had struggled with how can it be that it's okay for Boaz to marry Ruth, and how is it okay, and so first of all, your point about Boaz being a Torah scholar who used that linguistics to that was awesome. But I wonder, how did you come up with that notion that that Boaz is actually? I think of it like a tikkun, that the fracture that existed between Avram and Lot, really, you see it when they're first moving to Eretz Canaan, is when that fracture really begins. But it gets worse and worse through the story of Sodom and Amorah, and then eventually the Moabites, who were once our relatives and family, people that we cared deeply about, became fractured. And then the thing that brings them together ultimately is this kindness, and that leads to the Mashiach. So how did you find that? How did you come up with that kind of connection, I wonder?
I've always loved that image of Boaz lying with Ruth next to him, and it's pitch black. And when I've talked about this with teenagers, I just think to myself, it would be so easy for Boaz to have done, the wrong thing or the easy thing. And yet he did the right thing. And I also have wondered why don't we talk about Boaz more? Like, he deserves to be lifted up. And I find it counterintuitive. It's ironic for me because I'm always busy about let's find and talk about more women in the Bible. But wow, here's a man that we can actually look up to and try to be like him. I did some reading of the work of Yael Ziegler on the site of Yeshivat Har Etzion. And I read an English translation of Ruth Rabbah. And I also asked my own family members, and one of my nephews is a rabbi and a psychologist, 8-time Geffen, and he said exactly, what the Midrash said, that it's how you treat the individual. That's what's really important.
And that's what's going to bring about the Mashiach, right? Ultimately, we sometimes think about it being the grand gestures and the big statements. I mean, how many times do we as clergy people think that we have to say the big thing and like give the right talk or use the right melody on the Yamim Noraim or something like that? How many times do we think about the big moments when in fact the thing that's going to bring salvation to the world are the small moments? And I love that notion from Boaz. It reminds me, one of my favorite teachings from Ruth Rabbah is that there was a king who was traveling along with his entourage, and there was a little bump in the road, and one of the jewels of his crown had fallen out and gotten buried in the dust. And he goes looking in the dust, and he finds the jewel, and and all of his hi, can you hear? I'll help you with that in a second. All of his kind of servants, they say, what difference does it make? You have so many jewels in your crown. And he says, no, I gotta find it. And they say, come on, you're gonna get dirty. He says, no, I have to find it. And he finds it, and he says, this is going to be now the crown jewel, the one at the very top, because and that's the way that we were meant to think about King David, or this family, the family of Ruth and Boaz. And it's like they're worth digging through. to find the gem that is King David. And like I said, you could easily be like, well, let that be, let that mitzvah go, let that opportunity to be kind go, and you say, oh, there are plenty of moments, don't worry. But no, every jewel, every person, every moment has the opportunity to be the thing that brings about salvation and brings about the Mashiach.
I had read that and I didn't quite understand it, but when you retold it right now, I realized I've thought of Boaz as that lost jewel. That, well, wait a second, let's not move on from the story. Let's pick him up, lift him up, and look at him and see how great he is. And let's all try to be a Gever Chacham Ba'oz, Gever Chacham Boaz.
Yeah, that's another amazing thing, that when we think about strength, I mean, as somebody who identifies as male and grew up as a boy in the world, what does strength look like? What does masculine strength look like?
Yes.
And what I really appreciate is that you're pointing out that for Boaz, his strength was really internal. I now see you as the expert on Boaz. If I ever have a question about Boaz, I'll send you an email or something. But do we have any description of Boaz's like physical appearance that you can recall?
Not that I can recall. And yes, so all of his greatness is in his in the way he conducts himself, in the way he treats people. Yeah.
Yeah. So the Boaz, it's within that there's an internal strength. And again, that real strength of of a person, not just males, but the real strength of a person comes from their ability to notice other people, and their ability to, when presented with an opportunity to do wrong, to actually do right. I mean, you mentioned this, but Naomi and Ruth, who are great characters, they thought that the best way to get Boaz to agree to marry Ruth was actually for her to seduce him, or at least to put her in a situation where he could seduce her.
Yeah.
And
that was the only recourse that they had.
Right.
And of course, Tamar and Lot's daughter, that was the only power that women had.
Yeah.
To place themselves in the wrong place.
That's very interesting and amazing. So really, to Hazzan, Sara, Geffen, Geller, I really, really appreciate. I learned a lot in the last 25, 30 minutes, and I'm grateful for your offering this morning, and really wonderful. And I think we are going to transition now. My hosting responsibilities have thusly concluded, and I really am grateful to all of the teachers who have been on. And I know that the person that I'm handing the reins to as we transition is Deborah Newman-Kamen. Hi, Rabbi. Good to see you. It's really fun doing this job, and Chag Sameach to everybody, and I wish you all a wonderful rest of your day of learning, and maybe some people will eventually get some sleep, but not quite yet. Don't sleep yet, because we got some great teachings coming up. So Rabbi Deborah Newman-Kamen, Bavakasha, thank you so much.
Hi.